Good morning, everybody. Just watching the attendees flying in here. The numbers are flying up, so we'll give a good bit of time, well, the next minute or so, just to allow people, and then we'll get started. Okay, we might kick off then. So the first thing I'd like to do is to welcome everybody to this morning's CPD on managing stress and improving wellbeing at work for 2021, which will be delivered for us by Dr. Jennifer Hines. Jenny has several years' experience lecturing in the areas of workplace wellness, human resource management, organisational behaviour and economics in Trinity Business School. She holds a PhD in organisational psychology and behaviour, a Master of Education, a Master of International Economics and a Bachelor of Business Studies. Her interests lie in the area of employee well-being, stress, burnout, work engagement, psychological capital, workaholism and employee motivation. And Jenny is also a member of the British Academy of Management, Education Studies Association of Ireland and European Association of Work and Organisational Psychology. Looking after our well-being and our mental health is clearly always really important, but it is particularly in the challenging times that we found ourselves throughout last year and into 21 with the impact of COVID. So I thought before we start this morning, it might be of interest to share some survey results so we can just see what are the stress levels and well-being amongst the surveying profession. So as members will be aware, we did conduct a survey that went out in December, and it just closed this week with a really high response rate. It was fantastic. Over 500 members participated in that survey, and it did actually find that 38% of respondents reported that their mental health has decreased as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. 48% reported that COVID-19 has had a negative impact on their work-life balance, and 67% reported that working from home has led to them working longer working hours overall. So when asked to rate how much pressure they currently feel at work on a rate of a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, the average came out at 6 out of 10 feeling pressure. So a really stark finding, which is particularly pertinent to this morning's CPD, is that 59% of surveyors reported that they often feel excessive levels of stress at work. So obviously it is really timely that we welcome Jenny this morning to talk to us about stress and some ways to manage it. So Jenny is going to use empirical and practitioner evidence to provide several effective techniques that we can all use to help us better manage our stress. So the talk will last approximately 45 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session. If you wouldn't mind to use the Q&A function to pop your questions in there. And also we would like the seminar to be active. So Jenny has some polls that will be run throughout. So we would ask, the polls are anonymous. So just if you wouldn't mind to participate, it'd be really add to the session. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shirley. Thanks, everybody. It's lovely to be here today to start, 2021 talking about something which is so important. As Shirley mentioned, this is an area of my research that I'm very interested in, managing stress. It's very important. We're spending so much of our times at work, and it can really have a positive impact on us, but it can also have, a very negative impact on us. So to get going, the first thing I wanted to do today was just get a poll up and running. So just which best describes you. I'm just interested to know who here is self-employed, who's working for a small firm, and then who's working for a large organization. I know from speaking with Shirley and Michelle, we've got lots of different situations within the industry. So far I'm seeing here pretty much almost an even split between self-employed, small firm, large organization. Small firms coming out number one so far. Really even split. That's interesting. So pretty much 39% and 32%. We'll publish these results now in a second. I'm just waiting for them to come in. Just anybody else want to complete that? Great. Okay. So Michelle, do you want to launch that? Great. Okay, so we have 30% are self-employed, 39% are working for a small firm, and 32% work for a large organization. Do you want to stop sharing that, Michelle? I can close it. Okay, so that's great. So I've pretty much a nice even split, a third, a third, a third, working in different types of organizations. That's important because that will impact the type of drivers of stress that you may experience. So how I wanted to run today, I'm just going to, for today's webinar, what I'm going to do is just look at, first and foremost, what is stress? So what do we mean when we talk about stress? We're going to look at some of the common outcomes of stress. We'll look at what happens to me and my organization when I'm experiencing stress. And then we'll finish up today looking at different ways and different techniques on how to manage stress. And we'll look at, some of the different drivers and the different ways that you can manage those stress levels. So kind of to start it off, I wanted to look at, well, what is stress? So there's lots of different meanings depending on the literature that you read. So, you can talk about stress in terms of from sociological factors. You can talk about it in terms of biological factors. You can talk about it as well in terms of psychology. So it has lots of different meanings depending on who's talking about it. Now, stress actually, it impacts so many of us. It's actually very, very normal. And it's no problem to be stressed to a certain extent. So actually a certain level of stress is good for us. It motivates us, it gets us up out of bed in the morning, and it pushes us to kind of live our day-to-day lives. When it becomes unhealthy is when it starts to impact our functioning. Okay, and it's normally, we'll exhibit some sort of a physical response or some sort of an emotional response, and we know that it's negative, and that's when it starts to become a problem. Stress, when it occurs over an extended period of time, can actually lead to burnout. And that's when we start to become cynical. We start to lose hope. We start to depersonalize and reduce our contacts with others. And we start to feel exhausted as well. So they're kind of the signs of burnout. So, stress over an extended period of time can really have some very severe negative impacts. And we'll look at some of them today. The Health and Safety Executive in the UK talk about how stress is a harmful reaction to undue pressures and demands placed on an individual at work. Today, we'll look at what are some of those pressures and demands. And these pressures and demands have been identified from, thousands of empirical studies from around the world. So what are the common types of pressures and stress that people suffer from at work? And then the Health and Safety Authority of Ireland talk about how stress is a problem when it results in feelings of an inability to cope. So the stress is no longer manageable, and you end up in a situation where you feel like, I'm actually not able to cope. I can't deal with this. And we'll look as well today at some ways on how to kind of buffer against these stressors in order to enhance your ability to cope. So common signs of stress, and maybe many of you will be experiencing some or all of these, or maybe you've experienced some of them at a different time. So worrying, panicking, brooding, feeling on edge, suffering from low self-esteem, finding it difficult to concentrate, finding it difficult to sleep. So kind of lying awake at night, unable to switch off, ruminating, going through the problems over and over in your head. And then that really has a negative spillover effect into you for the next day, because you come to work, you're exhausted, you haven't had any time to switch off, you start to feel bad about yourself, and you can end up with a tendency to catastrophize and think about the worst. This is absolutely feeling hopeless, potentially crying, so feeling tearful, and then also irritable and angry. So that can have an impact really on you in terms of your social life. But also, these are all very psychological factors, but there are social factors, and people as well, their behavior, their natural behavior to respond to the stress is potentially eating or drinking too much. So you hear a lot about that in the media at the moment. Alcohol consumption has risen, since COVID. And that's a coping mechanism that people use. Now, it's an unhealthy coping mechanism, but it's quite a natural coping mechanism. So these are very kind of social and psychological signs of stress. But on top of that, stress has a serious impact in terms of your physical health. So when you think of stress from a biological perspective, our bodies can only, reach certain limits. You can't exceed limits within the body over an extended period of time without having some sort of negative impact in terms of your physical health. So typical outcomes from stress. And these are derived from some of the sources I've mentioned there. So the International Labour Organization, the NHS, American Medical Association, American Psychological Association. So musculoskeletal problems. So I'm sure many of you have experienced shoulder pain, neck pain, headaches then. And then as a result of this, you may actually engage in less frequent exercise, and you can end up with muscle atrophy and just kind of, wasting of your muscles, and just it can really cascade into multiple problems. Respiratory problems, this kind of results as a fight or flight response. So when we perceive a stressful event, it can lead to shortness of breath, hyperventilating, and then it's not really a problem for somebody who doesn't have any particular breathing problems, because once the event is over, you will return to a normal level. But it's actually problematic for people who have asthma, or anybody with kind of chronic bronchitis or anything like that. Stress also causes endocrine problems. So if you consider your body a bit like a computer mechanism, and there's lots and lots of messages coming from the brain to produce hormones when there's a stressful event. So your body produces cortisol, but excessive production of cortisol can result in visceral fat. So if you're not actually burning off the cortisol, and you're sitting at your desk freaked out and panicking in work, you're producing cortisol, and that can lead to then visceral fat. So that's fat around your organs, which then leads to diabetes. So these actually, in terms of COVID-19, are really serious comorbidities. It can also lead to depression, problems with your immune system, and chronic inflammation, which has also been associated with cancer. In terms of cardiovascular problems, you can have issues with hypertension, so high blood pressure. Your risk of a heart attack increases, your risk of stroke. Again, you can suffer from inflammation, and then you can have increased cholesterol levels, and that can be a result of your behavior when you become stressed. So what do you turn to when you become stressed? Are you engaging in a healthy diet, or are you eating poorly? And this then can have an impact on your cholesterol levels. And then finally, your gastrointestinal problems. So your gut, is sending, thousands and thousands and thousands of messages. And, we all hear about ads on the TV about drink this yogurt, for your gut health or whatever. But your gut is actually really, really, really sensitive. And when you end up with stress, it can cause problems in terms of dysregulation. It can really impact your immune system. And then you can just have the really uncomfortable pains and bloating and heartburn and acid reflux because of these issues, which are derived from stress. You can end up with lower mood, and then poorer nutrient absorption. So, the last slide and this slide really paint a very negative picture of what can happen as a result of stress. So not only are we psychologically damaged in terms of how we feel about ourselves, and then how we get along with others, but then also our physical health can really be impacted. And the way really to alleviate this is trying to return to baseline levels, what medical doctors refer to baseline levels. So that's, how do you achieve that? You achieve that through relaxation, you achieve that through disengagement, you achieve that through allowing your body to relax and replenish its resources. So these are kind of some of the very negative impacts of stress on you as a person. But then also there are huge implications of stress for organizations. And I mean, organizations are, if you're thinking about your bottom line, what are the kind of impacts of stress for us as an organization? Perhaps there are some managers here, or some, kind of senior decision makers. Well, stress causes long-term absence. It also has been associated with presenteeism. So that's showing up on the job, but not actually being there. So in body, but not in mind. And I think this can be a really big issue with COVID right now, because it's almost difficult to kind of ring in sick when you're working from home, because there might be this expectation that, oh, well, look, you can still log in. Why would you be logging out? You're sick. You can work from home. It also has an impact on employees' behavior. their performance, and their relationships. So when people are exhausted and they're suffering from, gastrointestinal problems and even a headache, you can become cranky, crabby, narky with others, ill-tempered. And all of these things have a spillover effect in terms of the organizational climate. There are many, many, many studies that have looked at crossover, contagion, and spillover of mood to others. So we're very much so impacted by those who are around us. So the people that we work with, or now at home, we're really impacted by those we live with. So if you're living with somebody who's in foul mood, it's likely to spill over to you. Stress also has a negative impact on job performance. I don't think that's too surprising. If people are exhausted and they're suffering from all of these physical and psychological outcomes, they're not going to perform at their highest level. They also suffer from reduced self-esteem, and then they can also, be less accurate and more prone to error in their job. On top of that, which may be, more applicable, I suppose, for certain industries, it can actually cause lower levels of creativity. You have an impaired memory, you're not as good at making decisions, and then you're irritable as well. So to kind of summarize that, what am I saying? It's costly. And I have a cost here from Germany, from the construction industry. And they talk about how psychosocial disorders result in the loss of 1.5 million working days a year, and that's a loss of 160 million euros. So that's within the construction industry. There are studies that find the same within the education industry, within the health service. I was only watching something the other day that, about the current crisis, and I suppose how health workers are suffering from extreme stress, how they've been working under chronic stress for, quite a long period of time. So it's very costly in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, and performance. I'll return to this model in a later slide. This model on the left here, it's the job demands resources model, and discuss it in a bit of detail. So I want to run poll number 2 now, and I'm interested in what causes you the most stress. So if Michelle, if you could upload that, that's great. So from the list below, which causes you the most stress? Is it financial worries, workload, problems with people, technology, admin, red tape? So it seems to me right now, it seems that workload is a major issue, a significant issue over any other problems. So right now we've got workload is coming up number 1, problems with people number 2, financial worries number 3, problems with tech and admin red tape number 4, and instability number 5. Okay, great. Okay, so now I hope everybody can see the poll results. So that's interesting. Number 1, workload, 40% would rate that as their biggest problem. 20% would rate problems with people as their biggest problem. Then number 3, financial worries, 18%. 14% technology, admin, red tape, and then 7% job instability. Okay, so that's interesting, the workload. That's interesting. Okay, leading on to my next slide. That's great. Okay, I'll just close that there. Okay, so just hang on a sec. Every time a poll loads up. Now, okay, so I'm going to return to this idea of overload and workload now in a moment. First, I wanted to just to chat to you a little bit about why do we become stressed. So what are the different theories, I suppose, out there? And what I've done is I've just built this up kind of in a 4-stage process. At first, there's some sort of a transaction between an individual and an environment. So the environment in this context will be, your work. So you're at work and then something happens, okay? And that's this transaction between you and the environment. And then what happens is you actually, as a human, take that information in and you start to perceive what's happened. So your mind is now starting to process the event and what's happened. You're looking at your expectations, and then you're trying to interpret what has actually happened here at this moment. And then that will impact how you cope. A discrepancy then will occur when there's an incongruency between what you hoped would happen and what has actually happened. And then that leads to a reaction to the stimulus, okay? And your reaction can be a behavioral reaction, an emotional reaction, and then these physiological responses. So for example, the increased heart rate, or the rapid breathing. And again, these are kind of our fight or flight stimuli, which lets our body know to kick in that this is a stressful event. But on top of that, then there are all these emotional processes. So, you'll have different types of feelings depending on what's just happened. You'll have different attitudes depending on what has just happened. And what's really important here is our perception and how we interpret messages and how we receive data from the environment, how we process it, and then how that impacts our behavior. And what that does is it actually places us really at the center of why we become stressed. And typical things as to why we become stressed. There's a really interesting piece of work from Stefan Hopfl. And Stefan Hopfl developed the conservation of resources theory. And the conservation of resources theory is a really well-known theory within psychology about why people become stressed. And Stefan Hopfl talks about how, well, in life, we like to have some form of control, and that's important to us. But then every individual, so I will have certain resources I want, Shirley will have certain resources she wants, Michelle will have certain, and all of us will have different resources that we're working towards in our lives. And what Hopfl talks about is when we fail to acquire these resources, that we can become quite stressed. So our lives are kind of built around this idea of trying to gain resources that we want. We're trying to protect the resources that we have. And when we feel that there's a threat or a loss of these resources, that can really kick in, our stress outcomes, and we can end up in what's called a resource loss spiral, where we engage in certain behaviors because we feel threatened by this loss. So different things that we are, very much motivated by are objects. So shelter, different types of houses. So we may as well, we may be comparing our, where we live against where our friends live, or we're comparing cars. So, maybe it is, I want this latest Audi, blah, 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 or I want this BMW, I want this house by the sea. And all of these things that we want, the personal characteristics, the conditions, self-esteem as well. So some people are really motivated by, perhaps having a powerful job, having seniority. Some people are very motivated by money. Some people are more motivated by, self-esteem or having a good marriage and a happy family life. So, we're all very different. So when we think of the definition of stress, that it's a perceived loss or an imbalance between what we want, it really places the individual in the stress event, that we're not just there at the mercy, I suppose, of our workplace. So other typical things that we're motivated by are money, social support, insurance, and credit. Now, I mean, you can have a read of any of these journal articles. They're very interesting, and any motivational theories as well. They're very interesting on what kind of motivates us. So I have kind of a slide here just looking at some of the different factors that will motivate why or influence why we become stressed. So 40% here have said that they're suffering from kind of work overload. And then number 2 was just problems with others. Okay, we'll look at that again in a bit more detail. So you can see that there are 4 main bubbles here. And we become stressed because we live in a culture, we live in society, we're social beings, and we compare ourselves against others, and we can't help it. And this comes from our early, expectations from our parents, from school, from our neighbors. And, this happens in work. We compare ourselves against our colleagues. Why did she get that? Why did he get that? Why didn't I get that? And there's lots of different studies, looking at this in terms of effort, reward, and imbalance. We're also impacted by these internal drivers, so our motivations, our hopes and dreams in life. Then the job variables, so that could be, the design of the job, the climate at work, all of these types of variables. And then we're also impacted by economic variables. So, what's the cost of living in the city that we live in, and our ability to make ends meet. So these are kind of some of the reasons why we will become stressed. And I think this is a really nice definition that kind of brings everything together. And it's from the International Labour Organization. And they talk about how stress at work is a perceived imbalance between the demands we face, the resources we have, and your ability to cope. So there's 3 different variables here that impact how stressed we feel. And we'll look at some ways in order for you to build resources, in order to help you to cope, in order to meet the demands that you face in your job. So this slide has a lot of detail on it, but these are some of the typical demands that are drive stress, and these are based on lots and lots of research out there over an extended period of time. And you've mentioned these within the poll that we just ran there. So feeling like you're losing control, hindrance stressors. So problems with people was number 2 here. So that could be verbal or physical abuse. It could be bullying, harassment, violence, poor relationships with your supervisor, lacking support, the distress of your manager as well, abusive supervision, poor labor relations. These things can have a really, really negative impact on us in terms of our stress. I'd recommend having a look at the ESRI because they've done a lot of research on where stress in Ireland, and they actually compared data from 2010 and 2015, and actually problems with your colleagues came up as one of the biggest issues of drivers of stress in Ireland. We also have isolation, which is a big problem now at the moment because people are working from home. And there's nothing to do in the evening, and it's just very tempting to work all the time. Then as well, there are the economic drivers, so insecurity, fear of a pay cut, just worried about the future, not knowing what's going to happen. And then in terms of the culture at work, that can kind of lead in as well to the social factors of getting on well with colleagues or not. Then as well, your work design plays a really big role. So number 1 was workload was a problem in the group here today. So that can be as a result of the content of your work, the control that you have over your work, the design of the job. Are you working kind of irregular and long hours? Do you feel under time pressure? So I'm obviously working within academia, and this is like a really serious issue within academia. Of work overload, just constant expectations, constant clashing timelines, and just a lack of ability to kind of take time out and rest. Other areas as well that cause problems are when people feel like they lack the knowledge and the skills, and they're kind of thrown in at the deep end, and they're not able to manage their work. And then all of these issues can cause blurred boundaries between work and family. As well, which then really spills over, your work spills over into your personal life, which is it's not nice. You spend enough time in work. So this is and I didn't know that you were going to say that work overload was your number 1 problem, but I actually took some quotes here from some research that I did last year, and it was in relation to feeling overloaded by work and suffering from an inability to disengage. And I have some quotes here from different participants that I interviewed. So like the first one here, if I wanted to make my week easier the following week, I could front load and do that for the weekend. So this person felt like their workload was so intense that they actually worked the weekend in order to front load so that they could gain some sort of control over the week ahead. Maybe some of you are suffering from that. The next participant spoke about how the previous one, and they mean their boss, worked on a Sunday. And I've experienced this, bosses that work on a Sunday. And she said, so you were a fool not to check your email. because she knew that on a Sunday, the boss would send out emails about what was happening first thing on Monday morning. That's a really negative pattern to get into, a habit to get into, working on a Sunday, because you're never done. Then you're always working. The next one, she spoke about how she had some colleagues and they were actually great at carving time for themselves, and they refused to check their emails at the weekend. But actually, upon reflection, she thought that the problem got worse for her if she didn't work at the weekend. So, she ended up saying, so in the end, it'll be more work for me if I don't, work at the weekend. Another person said they like to set the week off, at the weekend. And then another spoke about how easy it is to check your emails at the weekend and the evening, and even on holidays. This is, a really, really terrible scenario for people to be in. To me, there's an alarming problem with the workload if people feel that they have to work the weekend in order to get their work done. There's a problem with workload, potentially there's a problem with staffing, there's a problem with job design, there's a problem with expectations. And then, we have nowadays, because of changes in technology, it's just so easy to be on all the time and to disengage. And I don't know about your industry, but I know, I can speak about my industry. Your emails are coming in all the time. It's very tempting and it's very easy. I mean, I could work 24/7, 365 if I wanted to. I don't want to, but I could. And, potentially, you could be in that situation as well. And it will vary as well. We've got kind of a good split here between self-employed, small firm, large firm, and different organizations will have different, I suppose, drivers of this kind of work overload. So if you're working, as an entrepreneur, it's really, it's you're maybe living kind of week to week, and that can push that. But then in a large organization, these kind of drives may be coming from senior management. So it's really important to kind of be aware of your workload and the impact that not having this time off at the weekend and not putting time aside, the physical impact it can have on you and how it can lead to chronic illness. So the third poll I wanted to look at was, I feel more stressed in the last 12 months. So if Michelle, if you could upload that poll there. And I took a note anyway as Shirley was speaking. So I think Shirley mentioned that 6 out of 10 are feeling pressure, 59% are feeling excessive stress. So I'm anticipating, yes, wow. So if I was to break up strongly agree, we're looking at the majority, nearly 70%, actually nearly 80%. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so we can see 49% agree, 25% strongly agree. Okay, so that means, pretty much 75%, 3/4 of you are feeling more stressed in the last 12 months. So something, obviously the big C, the big COVID is causing more stress, but it's not just that. It's the isolation, it's the working from home, it's not having the social resources from your colleagues. I know myself, just all of a sudden being thrown into, I think it was in March, it was just all of a sudden, okay, Jenny, you're online. Oh, okay. I'm not really set up at home for this. I don't have the correct internet or all of these things. So, we've been through a lot, but we should give ourselves a pat on the back for getting through it. So this always causes a delay. Just hang on a second. Okay. So what I wanted to do just here was kind of a typical COVID scenario, and I think probably many of you will relate to this. And this is just made up, but it's a typical type of COVID scenario of the types of pressure somebody will be facing, and then the types of feelings that they will have. So in this case, the person says, normally I'm a fairly easygoing person, but lately work has been unbearable. I feel under constant pressure to do things, and I don't feel comfortable doing. I used to chat with my colleagues when I had a problem. Sorry, I just need to move this. When I had a problem, but now I feel so isolated. I probably could ring them, but I know they have their own issues to deal with right now. On top of this, I'm worried about my future, and I have 2 school-aged children at home. My partner and I both work, and none of the deadlines or expectations have adjusted. I'm still expected to meet targets. To be honest, I cannot sleep. I'm freaked out. We sometimes take it out on each other. It's hard working from home. I feel quite trapped, and I feel guilty about my thoughts. Where is the joy in my life? My performance has gone down the drain. I am making mistakes all the time. I never get out, and I'm crying more often. My job is also on the line, and I'm very worried about retirement. We have very little money put aside. I think that this person kind of reflects how many people are feeling, and also they reflect, you know, what empirical evidence shows. So just in terms of finance, the finance side of things, a UK survey, you know, a significant amount of people wouldn't be able to pay a €100 unexpected bill, even more unable to pay a €500 unexpected bill. And, you know, 30+% in a US study wouldn't be able to pay anything, you know, over $1,000. So lots of people, you know, don't have any kind of emergency money put aside. Then they're also trying to manage working from home with children. So all of a sudden they're a teacher, they're you know, an employee. And I think, you know, the targets haven't changed, the expectations haven't changed. So it's very, very difficult for people to kind of manage this. So with this in mind, I kind of wanted to look at how can we build certain resources in order to help us to get control of what we can control, and in order to buffer us against stress. So you may kind of really relate to this person, and if you don't, then great, that's great for you. So this brings to the next question. I want to kind of get an idea of how do you feel in terms of your ability to solve problems that arise in your life? Okay, so 72% think they can. That's good. 1% strongly disagree. 12% disagree. 70% agree. 17 strong agree. Okay, great. So that means 87% think that, you know, you've got the skills and the techniques in order to help you to deal with kind of the challenges that arise in your life. And then 13% of you don't. So that's kind of positive news. So hopefully for the other 13%, you can take some things away from here today, and then for the other 87%, that you can use some of the skills here as well. So I'm just going to move on here. So, like, you know, if you have a look at any of the media at the moment, I think the media can be really difficult at the moment. And you can't escape all of the stressful situations, but what you can do is you can try to reduce some of the stress that you're suffering from. Okay, there's nothing you can do about what's happening right now in the world. But, well, the first thing you can do is, you know, pay less attention, I suppose, engage less with social media and the media. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in the next slides. So the kind of takeaway from today is I want you to think about trying to gain control through reflection, analysis, and planning. And these are evidence-based practices. They've been shown to work. They're used by, you know, psychologists, you know, around the world. So the first thing I want you to think about are trying to identify patterns of stress. And this, you know, get out a piece of paper or whatever works for you, and have a look at the situation and the circumstances. So what are the kind of the situations and the circumstances which cause stress for you? And then have a reflection on how did you feel at that point in time? What were your thoughts? What was going through your mind when that was happening? And then have a think about who was there. You know, are there any people who tend to be there all the time, or you know, is it an issue with a supervisor? Is it an issue with a colleague? And then have a look at how did you respond? Like, what types of behaviors did you engage in? Were you able to sleep that night? Did you skip the gym? Did you eat junk food? What did you do? How did you behave in response to that pattern of stress? And then the next thing is to try to eliminate these stressors. So when we have these setbacks, we know that we're going to have setbacks in life, but we can use, our skills, our reflection, our analysis to kind of identify, when they're likely to happen and what can I do to prevent them. And the reason why we do that is so that we can respond better. So when we look at our behavior of, after a stressful event, we can put plans in place in order to help us to respond better, to engage in a healthy response behavior rather than a negative response behavior. So instead of doubting ourselves and feeling terrible about ourselves, instead we look at it and we reappraise it and we think, okay, well, look, you know what, I'll learn from this. There's something to be learned from this, and I can move on and I will be better able to deal with this in the future. Another one is putting plans in place. I love plans. But maybe I'm a bit type A in that way, but I love a plan. I love a spreadsheet. I think probably many of you probably work in an industry where you probably like a spreadsheet. But put plans in place to help you to improve your skills and identify the resources that are at your disposal. So we'll conclude talking about those resources. And then what you need to do as well is just review regularly. You're all working, within, I suppose, a construction industry type or a housing industry type job. You would regularly review things. You would plan things. You wouldn't just build a house or sell a house without a plan. And you wouldn't, just continue on with a plan if it's not working. You wouldn't. You would review it. You would put plans in place, and you would try to identify ways to reduce any kind of issues that might happen. You're no different, your life should be no different, and you should invest, that time in yourself in order to bolster your chances of having, a less stressful year, compared to last year. So what can you do? So there's lots and lots of evidence about stress moderators. So these are things that buffer against stressful events. So, here on the left, we have the job demand resources model. And this model is based on, stress and motivation at work. And what we can see here are the job resources and personal resources that we, in combination, we use them in order to help us to meet the demands of the job that we face. So there's lots of things you can do in order to try to build those resources. Now, there are ways as well. It would take too long to discuss it. There are ways that you can reduce your job demands as well, but we've only got 45 minutes. So what can you do? What are the known resources that exist out there? So there's social resources, our physical resources, our psychological resources, and our financial resources. So what I'm going to do is just do one more poll, and then I'm going to finish up. So I just want to ask about how much time you spend working rather than socializing. Okay, so the majority, we're pretty much 80% are spending more time working now. I'm not surprised. Okay, great. Everybody can see that. So 46% are are spending more time working. In agreement, 33% strongly agree. So, we're really talking about a significant majority of people attending here are spending more time working than socializing with friends, hobbies, or leisure activities. Okay, that's interesting in terms of the implications that will have in terms of your resources. Okay, so one of the final points I wanted to make today was about gaining control and building resources. So we see the 4 different resources here, and there are different things that you can do in order to try to build them. And you're building them because we know that these buffer against stress. So in terms of social resources, a recommendation is to give and seek social support. So how do we seek social support? So we seek social support by getting in touch with those that we trust, having discussions with colleagues that we like, that we trust, gaining, trust and speaking more and communicating more with our managers, and helping others as well, and having that balance between helping others and then having others help you. So, when people are stressed, they tend to withdraw and they spend less and less time with others. But actually, social resources are really, really important. Having lots of studies have looked at how having, good relationships with your manager and good relationships with your colleagues correlates with lower levels of exhaustion, lower levels of stress, lower levels of burnout, and higher levels of productivity and motivation. So it's really important that you get out there and seek that support from others. I know it's easier said than done, but it is about communicating and building trust with others. Then in terms of our physical resources, an alarming majority there, I've said you're spending way more time working than you are on your hobbies or on your friends. It's really important that you put time aside and do this through your reflection and your planning. Analyze the stress events, reflect on what you did, and put a plan in place. So that these things are going to happen, but you also know that you need to invest time into your physical resources. So put plans in place in order to help you to ensure that you put that time aside to wind down, to exercise, to eat well. And whether that be planning, on a Sunday, what it is that you're going to eat for the week. But this is so important for your immune system. This is so important for your gut health. The winding down is so important for protecting your bedtime. So, some strategies will be, breathing techniques, yoga, I love Pilates, things like that can really help you to wind down. And exercise, it's really important that you get out there in the daylight. And it doesn't have to be expensive as well. It can be, just buying some weights, buying a yoga mat, getting out for a walk, getting out for a run. What's really the most important there is doing something that you actually are able to maintain yourself. Then in terms of your psychological resources, so managing this media and social media consumption. And then, a really important one are kind of regulating our emotions and our mindset. So there's lots of research on having a fixed versus a growth mindset. And it's not surprising that many people will have a fixed mindset. You grow up, you go to school, you learn that, I have to achieve these certain grades in order to be, that makes me worthwhile. And then we take that into our adult lives or whatever. But if you actually switch to a growth mindset and you're easier on yourself and you give yourself a break and you recognize, look, I'm constantly changing and I'll be changing until my last breath. And you see yourself as a work in progress and you reevaluate how you see things. And you don't see things black and white, you don't personalize, and you adjust your kind of expectations on yourself. That can make your psychological resources much stronger. And then in terms of financial resources, that means building financial literacy. So an Irish study found that there are two core behaviors of people who have financial well-being, and the first one is that they actively save. And then the second one is that they don't borrow for day-to-day expenses. So, be really mindful of what do you spend your money on? What are your incomings? What are your outgoings? Where can we make some cutbacks? But I also want to say, you don't want to be cutting back all the time, because it's important that you enjoy your life. You want to have disposable income that allows you to actually enjoy your life. But are there any ways where you can cut money to kind of build for your future in terms of your savings, and cut back on any loans? Look at the interest rates on loans compared to the interest rate on any money that you put in the bank. It's a pittance. It's abysmal. Any kind of rates now in the banks. So just to conclude, I wanted to point out, just look, stress is normal. We all feel stress. There's things that stress me out and there will be things that stress you out. What's really important is you can adjust how you respond to that stress. by putting those plans in place and reflecting. And you can build these buffers, so invest time into building, connections with others, spending time on yourself, readjusting how you think, and putting money aside for the future, having that kind of rainy day fund that can really help you to feel kind of secure about the future. So just to finish off, I've only had 45 minutes here, but I've actually just developed a course and I'm running it on the WorkWell Institute. So I've just put some details up here. If you're interested, there's a discount here if you use Surveyors21. This is the structure of the course, and it builds on identifying drivers of stress awareness and then developing those skills and techniques, and it puts in place an action plan. So I just want to say thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. I actually think I finished on time. Did I, Shirley?
Yeah, very good.
Great.
Yeah. Very good. That helped keep my and Michelle's stress levels down. That is really thank you for that, Jenny. That's great. We have a few questions coming in on the Q&A here, so I'll just put them to you. We'll get through as many as we can. There was just a comment there that home education obviously is an additional stress at the moment with COVID. A question here. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for your interesting talk. Do you have any simple and regular exercises you could suggest to help with keeping stress down? Something that could be incorporated into a daily routine?
Yeah, so I like to start the day. I do some Pilates exercises. I bought some weights as well. It's good because you can actually just do them from home. I think one of the biggest barriers for people are, well, now you can't go to the gym, to be honest with you. But the barrier will be, I have to get dressed, I have to drive, or I have to walk there. Then I have to, then I go in and then I shower. So there's some things that there's lots of resources online that you can use. So one really great YouTube, her name is Yoga with Adrian. I don't know if anybody knows her, but she's actually really good. Free, open subscription. But I would recommend, these kind of mindfulness techniques, yoga, Pilates, breathing exercises even as well, just taking a moment. So one of the key ones is, you take a breath in for 3, hold for 4, breathe out for 5. And that actually stops all the kind of the processes within your body in response to stress. Try it, just try it out and try that a few times. So they're kind of the ones I would recommend. There's lots of apps as well that you can install on your phone. There's so many free apps. There's so many great YouTube channels. Try it out and see what works for you. That would be my recommendation. And be kind to yourself as well. Don't all of a sudden turn around and say, I'm going to do an hour of this. Don't. Be realistic about what time you actually have. And maybe even I sometimes find I split it up into 2. I do something in the morning and then I do something after work. And that might work for you as well. Great.
Very good. Okay, just a query around the stress levels in the third poll. Just a query, would those high levels of stress not be much the same any year? Don't we normally feel more stressed, I suppose, in the world that we live in? And is it all fully attributable to COVID, I suppose?
No, I think COVID is just, an exacerbator where we feel like, normally when we're suffering from stress, we can plan ahead and, maybe we'll take a holiday or something like that. And now it's very difficult. And on top of that, we're worried about our health. We're worried about our family's health. And then, when people have children at home, there are these extra, factors now that weren't part of, a typical stressful situation. But yeah, overload is what you would call a hindrance demand. And a hindrance demand is something that actually inhibits you from being able to achieve your goals. Whereas something that's challenging can actually really stimulate you and motivate you to work. Whereas overload, it results in kind of negative conclusions about yourself. It reduces your self-esteem. And, I know from my research, you'd have people and they would rate themselves as maybe, I'm 5 out of 10. I'm not doing great at work right now. So yeah, we had all of these factors. And now I just think COVID kind of exacerbates things because it's more difficult to get out. It's more difficult to let off steam. Can't meet friends, can't go out for a meal, can't go out for a drink. You're trapped within 5 kilometers. And some people, you know, maybe their 5 kilometers are really nice, but some people, their 5 kilometers is an industrial estate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny, for that. Another, we've 2 more questions. If we have time to get through them, that'd be great. So how far would you suggest a person goes with disengaging?
With disengaging, okay, that's an interesting one. So a lot of research has looked at work engagement, and maybe even, you know, you've heard a bit about it. So work engagement basically means that you're vigorous about your job, you're dedicated about your job. But then the third point that they measure when they measure work engagement is absorption. But actually absorption also correlates, and I don't want to get too scientific here, but it correlates with workaholism. And workaholism is this failure to disengage. So what I would say is important is to try to be mindful. So when you're at work, focus on what it is that you need to do at work and put plans in place in order for you. And they can be, you know, SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals. And they can be short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. When you're at work, focus on work. But there's no point in going home and then sitting at home and worrying about work, because A, you know, you're not spending time with your family, you're not spending time on yourself, and it's wasted time, because then you're not able to sleep. So I would say, you know, in terms of what kind of levels, protect your personal time. When you're at home, you're at home. When you're at work, you're at work. And if that means, you know, as you're working from home, lots of people are suffering from, you know, problems with, I can always see the computer, it's always there. You know, find a way to create some sort of a boundary between your personal life and your work life, because otherwise you're not relaxing, you're failing to disengage, and you are going down a slippery road of workaholism, which has, you know, really negative outcomes. So I'm not saying to become completely disengaged and don't bother during the day at work. No, you know, your jobs can give you a lot of life satisfaction and meaning in your life. So, you know, that's really important. But, you know, your life is more than work. You know, you need to protect your personal life, your physical health, and all of these things.
Great, thank you, Jenny. The last question then is, could you explain, please, what is meant by the growth mindset?
A growth mindset. Okay, so a growth mindset is when we see kind of the world as constantly changing, that we're evolving, and that we can learn new things, and that with these new things, we change over time, that we're not in this fixed idea of, oh, I'm terrible. So I'll give you an example. You know, in school, you know, potentially there's a subject you're not very good at, and you carry this idea all the way through your life. Oh, I'm not good at maths, or I'm not good at Irish, I'm not good at this. And it's kind of been embedded in your head that you're not good at something. Whereas the growth mindset looks at that and it tosses it on its head, and it says, okay, well, you know what, you know, life is evolving, situations are changing, I come and go in jobs, people come and go in jobs, people come and go in my life, and I'm constantly evolving and I'm learning new things. I'm putting all of those things into practice to see yourself in a kinder way, and that you're kind of a work in progress, and that nothing is definite and set over a period of time. So, you know, really a lot of it comes from school and family. You know, it's really influenced by your time in school and your time in family. There are people still probably tormented by their CAO points, you know, and that's the idea of this fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. I can recommend a book. Her name is Carol, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, Dweck. It's Dweck. She's a guest speaker on lots of TED Talks as well. And her book is really, really interesting. And she talks about, you know, a student who got into Harvard, and the family still weren't satisfied because they wanted her to go to some other university, and how we end up spending our lives desperately trying to please others rather than living our lives for ourselves. So it's a good book. It's an interesting book.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jenny. We're just on time. I think we'll leave it there if there's no more questions. So just to say thank you so much on behalf of everybody that tuned in to Jenny for a really fascinating and useful presentation. And just to remind members, this is available. The recording will be up on the SCSI website either later today or tomorrow. There's lots of positive comments coming in from participants there. We had over 170 and we still have 152 on, which is a fantastic turnout.
Wow.
Where people have taken the time out of those clearly busy workloads that everybody has. So it just shows the importance of this topic and the fact that we had such engagement with our wellbeing survey, that I will say to any members out there, watch this space, because certainly the SCSI will be seeking to provide more similar supports to members in the coming months, because clearly there is a need and a desire to engage with it. So thank you, Jenny, and everybody have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.